Good morning, 8:39, News Talk 99.7 WNTK, WNTK.com, News Talk 98.9 and 1490 WUVR. John Harper, Jim MacKay on this Thursday, the 7th of July. It is a time when the Senate should have been in recess. They're not. They are focused on our looming fiscal crisis. Will the debt ceiling be raised? President Obama wants a July 22nd drop-dead date. The actual drop-dead date to get this thing done is August 2nd. Either way you cut it, not a lot of time to go. One of the reasons why the Senate is still in session and the July 4th recess was canceled, our freshman senator from the state of New Hampshire, U.S. Senator Kelly Ayotte, joining us this morning on WNTK live from Washington. Senator Ayotte, good morning. So how did you stop vacation from happening?
Good morning, John. Well, there's a group of us that objected to going into recess. We're new freshman senators. We see this deadline looming, and frankly, want the Senate to take up legislation that deals with the fundamental issue, which is spending, debt, and the deficit. So it just, to me, it just didn't make sense that and then when we came back, they were going to put on Harry Reid was going to put on the floor a resolution about Libya. Now, Libya is an important issue, but with this looming deadline and having canceled our recess, we all got together and actually objected to that and said, no, let's talk about spending and debt and address this and roll up our sleeves and get this thing done. So that's why we're down here this week. And, this is a very, very important issue. We've got $14 trillion in debt. And if we're going to lift that basically credit limit again, just like if you had maxed out your credit cards, you wouldn't get an extension, increased credit limit, and another blank check. And I think that's what really this discussion is on right now.
Now, Senator President Obama is kind of sweetening the pot here in the debt ceiling negotiations. His plan is to slash about $4 trillion in spending over the next decade. This is instead of the $2 trillion in cuts that have been on the table until now. In exchange, he's looking for some savings reductions to Social Security, Medicare, and asking Republicans to abandon their refusal to eliminate corporate tax loopholes. How does that sit with you?
Well, I have to say this proposal on Social Security, I haven't seen it yet. It just came out, so obviously I want to look at it. I've been saying, first of all, we need to reform Medicare and Social Security. It's 63% of our spending, and the recent trustees report has said that Medicare goes bankrupt in 2024. That's 12 years from now, John, and Social Security in 2036. So if we don't make prospective changes to those programs now, those programs will not be there for the individuals that are relying on them and for future generations. So I'm all for us reforming those entitlement programs. They're a big part of our spending, and frankly, people rely on them, and if we don't act now, we're being irresponsible. I think with respect to taxes, the other thing I'd like to see is reform our tax code. It's become so complicated. How many lawyers and accountants do you need to fill out your taxes? We also have made ourselves uncompetitive. We have the second highest corporate tax rate in the world. So if he's talking about things like that would reform our code, that would actually lower rates overall but eliminate deductions, then I think, but also give people lower, more competitive rates, that's something I could agree to and would like to hear us talk about. But just to raise taxes unilaterally at a time when our economy is struggling, which would hit many small businesses, I think we also have to keep our eye on our economic growth in light of the over 9% unemployment rate nationally.
Senator Kelly Ayotte, our guest this morning on WNTK WUVR. Senator, you're the new kid on the block. You're the freshman senator. You've been there 6 months. You're going up against a lot of establishment Republicans and Democrats. What is their reaction to all of this? What is your reaction when you go up against these folks who have been there for a while and you see this gridlock?
Well, I think, let's face it, we don't need any more business as usual in Washington. And I think that there's a group of us down here who are new senators. That's why we objected to going into recess. It's why we said we should be talking about spending and debt this week. I just came off the campaign trail. I heard from folks in New Hampshire. I know how concerned they are about the deficit spending, and making sure that we have a positive climate for our small businesses to grow and thrive. So I think that I feel that there's a group of us that are saying, business as usual hasn't worked for us. So let's look at doing things differently and really get things done, rolling up our sleeves, solve these problems.
And does the establishment on both sides of the aisle understand the frustration that we as people here in New Hampshire, Americans across this country are feeling? It's that frustration, that look of that gridlock that we see coming from Capitol Hill. Is that settling in?
John, I think it needs to settle in more, because I feel the frustration. I know it's out there, and I agree with the American people on this frustration, because I've been in the Senate now for 6 months. Let me give you one example. I'm the most recent appointment to the Budget Committee, and I was very glad to get on the Budget Committee when Senator Ensign resigned. And it's been almost 800 days, or over 2 years, since the Senate has passed a budget. And since I got on this committee, we had one organizational meeting, and that's it. No other meetings. We've not put together a budget in the Senate. The reason for that is the majority leader said it would be foolish for the Democrats who control the Senate to put forward a budget. That's just one example, I think, why the American people get frustrated. I get frustrated as a new senator. I said, what kind of business, no family would run without a budget. And you wonder why we're running over $1.6 trillion deficit this year if we won't sit down and make the hard choices to prioritize our spending.
Senator Ayotte, do you feel that a number of your colleagues, both sides of the aisle now, are looking towards the next election as opposed to the impact their actions will have on the next generation?
Well, I think that's a real issue. It's not just Congress. I really hope that the president steps up. We need presidential leadership on this. That the American people want results. And the 2012 election, that's how the American people will judge the individuals in Congress, how they will judge the president. And I really firmly believe that we do have to put aside, this concern about always getting reelected and really focus on getting things done. And I firmly believe people in New Hampshire, that's what they want, and also across this country.
Senator Kelly Ayotte, our guest this morning on WNTK WUVR. We are talking about the Senate being in session, no July 4th recess, due in part by the actions of several freshman GOP senators, including Senator Ayotte. That's what we're talking about this morning, and some other issues down in Washington. Brian from Grafton shot us a question on email. He's listening on his smartphone on the WNTK app. And by the way, Senator, if you got a smartphone, you can download that free at WNTK.com.
Oh, wow.
There you go. You can stay plugged into New Hampshire. He wants to know if you feel that Representative Michelle Bachmann's voting for the Patriot Act might hurt her in the Republican primary, in the election that's coming up now that she's announced her candidacy for the presidency of the United States.
Well, I certainly can't judge. I mean, people will judge the candidates on their overall record. And one thing I want to say is that I also voted to reauthorize the Patriot Act. The reason that I did that is because, having been here, I know that Representative Bachmann serves on the Intel Committee. I serve on the Armed Services Committee. I wanted to know, has it been abused? I had a lot of hard questions about it because it's important that we really focus also on respecting the privacy rights of Americans. But the Patriot Act, the provisions that were just reauthorized, from what I heard from our military leaders, our intelligence leaders, this is very important tool to have to be able to protect us from terrorists, and we do remain at war with terrorists, and we've already seen other attempts on our country, and there are unfortunately still many who are plotting to try to harm our country. So I don't know how, I certainly can't speak to her voting record, but on the Patriot Act, I also voted that way as well.
Senator Kelly Ayotte, our guest. In the last 6 months, what has surprised you in Washington?
What has surprised me, I think, the most is that the Senate this year has taken so few votes. We are on, they talked about the do-nothing Congress. This Senate this year has taken half the amount of votes that we have historically taken, which I think is unfortunate because there are things that we should be getting done for this country, and there are actually issues that there may be bipartisan support for, but that the majority leader in the Senate, Harry Reid, I think, We talked earlier about being too focused on the 2012 election. He seems to be very focused on that 12 election, so he doesn't want to bring forward votes to put people on record. And I think that it's really important that we bring the legislation to the floor of the Senate, that we have those rigorous debates, that we let the American people know where people stand, and so that they can weigh in with their elected representatives, and we can really get things done. Some of the issues that I hope comes up in the Senate for a vote, we've got a balanced budget amendment that 47 of us are supporting. We've got what's called a CAP Act to cap spending at historical levels of spending. Right now we're spending 24% of our GDP or our economy. Over the 4-year average, we've only spent 20%. So that's how far out of line our spending is right now. So I'd like to see us vote more, and that's been real surprising to me. I thought we would get more votes than we have had yet in the United States Senate.
Senator Kelly Ayotte, our guest on NewsTalk 99.7 WNTK and WNTK.com. So, Senator, let me ask you, what more do you want to see from President Obama to get the debt ceiling raised? What kind of concessions are you looking for?
What I would like to see him agree to is long-term spending resolutions, things that really structurally deal with the failure of Congress over the long term to get spending order. I just talked about it. I'd like to see him agree to a spending cap. I'd like to see him also agree to a balanced budget, or sending a balanced budget amendment to the states. I mean, all we're asking for is to have the people of this country decide whether it's appropriate for the federal government to balance its budget like the states. And then I would also I'm encouraged that he's talking about entitlement reform. This is an opportunity for us to make some long-term significant structural changes so that we won't continually be in this discussion about raising the debt limit, and we really can put ourselves on a responsible track.
And to follow up on that point that you bring up, Senator Ayotte, about long-term goals, is it possible to shut off the spigot? Certainly the spending started with George Bush, and he acknowledges that. But, President Barack Obama has spent like a drunken sailor. So you've had people on both sides of the aisle with writing checks nonstop, and the entitlements that go out there and all of the things that are attached to really getting in office and staying there. Is it possible to reverse this, to shut off the spigot, to come back home and say to people in New Hampshire, sorry, but we're not going to have money for your special project. Sorry, this is what we have to do. Is it possible to turn Washington around on a dime to finally get us on some kind of fiscal order here?
Well, I think turning it around on a dime, John, this is something that why we need to make the changes now, because we've dug ourselves so far into the hole that it's going to take us some time to get out of this hole. But if we don't start now, what we don't want to be is a country like Greece, where other people are making the decisions for us. We should be making the decisions to chart our future in this country, to make sure we get our fiscal house in order. I mean, we've seen what are happening around the world, and that should not be us. We should make these changes now, and it is going to take us some time once we make the structural changes to bring down this debt, because with $14 trillion, it's not something you can reduce in one day.
Well, we'll have
or a year, frankly.
Yeah, definitely. I guess the joke is not turning it around on a dime, but given the fact that we've spent so much, it's turning it around on a silver dollar. I can't think of something even bigger than that.
And just to give you an example, I mean, the budget that the president proposed for 2012, I mean, that budget would have added another $13 trillion to our debt over the next decade. So we need to be passing budgets that actually reduce our debt over the next decade and, really bring it significant. We should be talking about reducing it by trillions over the next decade so that we're not continuing to go upward, because that is the chart where we've continued to go drastically upward. And it gets to a point where you're bankrupt.
Yeah. It's going to be an interesting next couple of weeks and 3 weeks in Washington, D.C., live from Capitol Hill. Senator Kelly Ayotte, our freshman senator from the state of New Hampshire. Senator Ayotte, thank you again, as always, for your time, and I'm sure we'll be talking between now and July 22nd and August 2nd. Thanks again for your time this morning.
Thank you, John. Take care. Have a great day.